The storm had come out of nowhere. The night sky over Ridgewood had been clear just hours before, but now the thunder clapped like the wrath of an ancient god. Ethan Wells tossed and turned in his small bed, staring out the window at the swirling darkness. Rain battered against the glass, the wind howling like a creature trapped in the trees. But it wasn't the storm that kept him awake. It was the sound. A soft whimper. A cry. Ethan's heart skipped. The wind was loud, but through it, he swore he could hear something. It was coming from the jungle behind their house, faint but clear, 2 German shepherds, their voices reaching him through the storm. One of the cries was particularly soft, almost a whimpering moan. It was different. It was hurt. His little fingers gripped the edges of his blanket as his mind raced. He wasn't imagining it. He could hear them. 2 dogs, calling out for help. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. Without thinking, he scrambled out of bed and rushed to the window, peering through the heavy rain to the shadowy outline of the jungle beyond. He squinted, but all he could see was darkness. He felt a cold chill sweep over him, not from the storm, but from the fear creeping up his spine. He had to do something. "Ethan!" A voice called from the doorway. His mother, Ava, stood in the frame, her worried eyes scanning the room. "What are you doing out of bed? It's past midnight." "Mom." "I heard something," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "In the woods. 2 dogs. They're crying. Please, we have to help them." Ava hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "Sweetheart, it's just the storm. It's probably the wind, playing tricks on you. Now, come on. Get back in bed." But Ethan didn't move. His small hands gripped the windowsill as he pressed his face against the cool glass. "Mom, I swear I heard them. They're in trouble." Ava's face softened, but there was no sign of believing in her eyes. "We'll check in the morning, okay? It's too dangerous out there now. The storm is too strong." But Ethan couldn't let it go. The urgency, the pain in the cries, it tugged at him in a way he couldn't explain. His small voice grew more insistent, more desperate. "Mom, they need us. Please," he begged, looking up at her with eyes wide and full of concern. Ava sighed deeply, glancing toward her husband, Liam, who had appeared at the door. He rubbed his eyes, still groggy from sleep. When he saw the look on Ethan's face, he understood without words. There was something more to this. "All right, buddy," Liam said, his voice softening. "Let's go take a look. We'll make sure everything's okay." Ethan's face lit up, but the storm outside seemed to echo the wild beating of his heart. They were going to find the dogs. The rain came down harder as the Wells family stepped into the night, their feet sinking into the wet earth as they ventured into the jungle behind the house. The storm had turned the world into a blur of water and wind. Ethan led the way, his small figure determined despite the darkness, guided only by the faint cries that seemed to grow louder with every step. "Keep close, Ethan," Liam called over the howling wind. "It's slippery out here." The jungle felt alive with sound, the creaking of trees, the rushing of rain, and somewhere deep within, the calls of the dogs. Each step Ethan took felt like a pull, like an invisible thread connecting him to the suffering animals. As they rounded a bend in the overgrown path, the cries became clearer. 2 dogs. Struggling. In pain. Ethan stopped in his tracks, his eyes wide. There they were, 2 German shepherds, chained to a thick tree in the middle of the jungle. They were drenched, shaking, their fur matted with rain. One of them, a female, was clearly pregnant. She lay on the ground, panting heavily, her eyes filled with a desperation Ethan couldn't ignore. The other, a male, stood guard over her, his fur soaked, his body trembling with fear and exhaustion. "Oh my God," Ava whispered, her hand flying to her mouth in horror. Liam cursed under his breath as he knelt beside the dogs. Who would do this to them? Ethan, unable to hold back any longer, rushed forward, his small hands trembling as he reached out to the dogs. The male shepherd growled softly, but it wasn't a warning, it was a plea, a cry for help. Ethan's heart twisted. He had to help them. He had to make it stop. He knelt beside the pregnant dog, gently stroking her wet fur. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice soft but filled with determination. "We're here. We're going to help you." The female shepherd let out a soft whine, her head sinking into the mud. Ethan's heart ached as he continued to whisper soothing words, his tiny fingers brushing through the wet fur on her neck. Liam stood up and turned to Ava. We need to get them out of here. Now. But Ava was already on her phone, calling the emergency vet, her voice tight with concern. Get an ambulance ready, she said urgently, the sound of her voice mixing with the storm. Ethan stayed close to the dogs, his connection to them growing stronger by the second. They were suffering, but with his touch, he hoped they would find comfort, even if only for a moment. He looked up at his parents, his face solemn but determined. They won't be alone anymore. We're taking them home. The journey back to the house felt even longer than the trek into the jungle. The storm didn't relent, and the weight of what they had found seemed to hang heavy in the air. Liam carried the male shepherd in his arms, the dog's head resting against his chest, while Ava supported Luna, the pregnant female. As they entered the warmth of their home, Ethan looked back at the dogs, a deep sense of relief washing over him. He had saved them. They were safe. And nothing, not even the storm, could change that. But little did Ethan know, this was only the beginning. The storm had just started. The storm outside continued to rage through the night, but inside the Wells home, there was a sense of calm. Ethan sat by the fireplace, his little hands gently petting Max, the male shepherd. Luna, the pregnant dog, lay on a large towel nearby, exhausted but safe, her soft breathing the only sound in the room. Ava, now changed into dry clothes, sat next to Luna, rubbing her belly. We'll get you checked out in the morning, sweet girl. You're going to be okay, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly as she stroked the dog's fur. Liam, meanwhile, was on the phone with the emergency vet. He had called ahead to make sure someone could help them immediately. But as he spoke, a sharp knock at the door made everyone freeze. The storm had picked up again, making it nearly impossible to hear anyone approach. Liam stood up and motioned for Ava to stay with the dogs. I'll see who it is, he said, his voice tense. The sound of the wind outside was deafening, and for a moment, the house felt as if it were about to be swept away by the storm. He opened the door to find a man standing in the doorway, drenched from head to toe. He was tall, well-dressed, with a stern look on his face. His dark, slicked-back hair was wet, and he carried himself with an air of authority that immediately put Liam on edge. Can I help you? Liam asked, trying to keep his voice calm, though suspicion rose in his chest. I'm Victor Hayes, the man said, his tone as cold as the storm outside. I need to speak with the owners of those dogs you just took from my property. Liam's heart skipped a beat. Those dogs don't belong to you, he replied, his voice firm. They were abandoned in the jungle, chained up. They're suffering. We've already called for medical help. Victor's eyes narrowed. I don't know what you think you've found, but those dogs are mine. I own them. And I want them back. Ava had heard the exchange from the other room and walked to the door, her hand protectively resting on Luna's side. We're not giving them back to you, she said firmly. We don't care who you are. You had no right to treat them like that. Victor's smile was thin, predatory. You don't understand, he said slowly. Those dogs are part of a very expensive breeding program. You've stolen from me, and I'm here to make sure you return them. Liam could feel the tension rising in the air. If you think we're just going to hand them over because you say so, you're mistaken. These dogs were abused, chained, left to suffer. That's not breeding. That's cruelty. Victor took a step forward, his eyes hardening. I don't care what you think. You'll hand them over, or there will be consequences. I can make your lives very difficult. Believe me, I have the power to do so. Ava's hands clenched into fists. We're not afraid of you. We're keeping them, and we're reporting you to the authorities. Victor's lips twitched in a barely there smile. This isn't over, he said, turning on his heel. I'll be back for them. As he walked away into the storm, Liam shut the door with a heavy thud, locking it. He turned to Ava, his face grim. Who the hell is that guy? And why is he so insistent on getting those dogs back? Ava shook her head, her hand gently stroking Luna's fur. I don't know, but I'm starting to get a really bad feeling about this. Ethan, who had been listening intently from the living room, stood up. His small face was pale with concern. Mom, Dad, we can't let him have them. He's not nice. I can feel it. Liam knelt down to Ethan's level, his hand resting on his son's shoulder. You're right, Ethan. We're not giving them back. But we need to be careful. Something isn't right about this guy. The next morning, after a restless night of worry, Liam and Ava took Max and Luna to the vet. The doctor confirmed their worst fears. Luna was indeed pregnant, but her body was badly injured from abuse. Max had clearly been used for fighting, with scars and deep gashes that hadn't been properly treated. The doctor's report was clear: the dogs had been subjected to unimaginable cruelty. "We'll do everything we can," the vet assured them. "But you'll need to keep them calm and safe. I'll give you some medication for their pain, and we'll monitor Luna's pregnancy carefully." As the vet worked to tend to the dogs, Liam stepped outside to make a phone call. Ava stood by the cages, her eyes welling with tears as she stroked Luna's head. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We'll never let anyone hurt you again." Meanwhile, Ethan sat in the waiting room, his small hands clenched in his lap. His mind kept replaying the night before, the storm, the cries of the dogs, and the cold look in Victor Hayes' eyes. There was something about the man that didn't sit right with him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about dogs, it was something much darker. Later that day, as the family returned home, they couldn't shake the ominous feeling that had settled over them. They knew they couldn't keep the dogs hidden forever, but how could they protect them from someone like Victor Hayes? That night, Ethan lay awake in his bed, unable to sleep. He kept thinking about what had happened, about the dogs, and about Hayes. He felt a deep, unshakable connection to the animals. It was as if they were calling to him, asking for help, more than just for their immediate safety, but for something much bigger. Then, just as he was about to close his eyes, he heard it again, the faintest cry. Max. But this time, it wasn't just a cry of pain. It was a cry of warning. Ethan jumped out of bed and ran downstairs, his heart pounding in his chest. The door was slightly ajar, and as he stepped outside into the cold, he saw something that would change everything. There in the distance, he saw a shadow moving, faint but unmistakable. Someone was out there, lurking near the woods. It was Victor Hayes. The next morning, after Ethan had seen Victor Hayes lurking near their house, the Wells family knew they couldn't stay quiet about what had happened. They had to protect Max and Luna, but it was becoming clear that simply hiding wasn't going to be enough. Victor was dangerous. He wasn't just a man with money, he was a man with power, and that power wasn't something the Wells family could ignore. Liam paced back and forth in the living room, his hands clasped behind his back. "We can't let him have them, Ava. If he's willing to show up here and intimidate us like that, it's clear he's not playing by the rules. We need to find out what's really going on." Ava nodded, her fingers still stroking Luna's soft fur. The pregnant dog had begun to settle into their home, though the trauma was still very visible in her eyes. She looked at Liam, worry etched on her face. "But how do we fight someone like him? He's got connections, resources. We're just a family trying to do the right thing." Ethan, sitting on the floor next to Max, looked up at his parents. "I don't think we should be afraid. Max and Luna are good dogs. They'll help us. They won't let anyone hurt us." His words were full of a quiet confidence that surprised his parents. They had seen how close he had become to the dogs over the past few days, as if there was an unspoken understanding between them. Liam knelt beside Ethan, his hand resting gently on his son's shoulder. "I know you've bonded with them, Ethan. And we're going to make sure they stay safe, no matter what. But we need to be smart about this. We can't just go charging in without knowing what we're dealing with." That afternoon, while Liam was researching Hayes' background and trying to find any legal loopholes to protect the dogs, Ethan was outside with Max. He'd been spending hours playing with the shepherd, throwing a ball for him to fetch. Max had quickly become more than just a rescued animal. He was a protector, a guardian, and a friend. Ethan felt safe with Max by his side. But something was wrong. Ethan looked up at the sky, where the clouds were thickening once again. The air felt heavier. The familiar sounds of the woods were quiet, unnervingly still. And then, Max stopped running. He stood at the edge of the yard, staring into the woods, his ears perked. "Ethan, come on. Let's go inside, buddy," called Liam from the porch, his voice cutting through the tense silence. But Ethan didn't move. He stayed where he was, watching Max's intense gaze. Max was alert, focused, as if he was sensing something that Ethan couldn't. Just then Luna, who had been resting on the porch, suddenly got up and limped toward the woods. Her eyes were wide, as though she, too, felt something ominous in the air. "Ethan, come here." Liam shouted again, his voice rising in concern. But Ethan's curiosity was too strong. "I'll be right back, Dad," he called over his shoulder, already walking toward the woods with Max and Luna in tow. As they ventured deeper into the jungle, the trees grew denser, the storm clouds overhead making it even harder to see. Ethan kept glancing back at Max, who was walking ahead, his steps deliberate, cautious. It wasn't just the woods that seemed off, it was the feeling that something dangerous was close, just beyond the trees. Then they saw it. Tucked away in the trees, almost invisible behind a thick wall of ivy and branches, was an old decrepit cabin. Its wood was rotting, the windows shattered, and the door was barely hanging on its hinges. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as he took a step forward. The dogs had stopped now, their bodies tense as they stood beside him. Max let out a low growl, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "What is this place?" Ethan whispered to himself. Luna whimpered softly, nudging him gently with her nose, as if warning him to stay away. But Ethan, driven by the need to understand what was happening, stepped forward. He reached for the door and pushed it open. Inside, the cabin was dark, with remnants of broken furniture scattered around. The air smelled stale, like old blood and rust. But the most horrifying sight came when Ethan looked down at the floor. There, scattered among the debris, were dog collars. Dozens of them, some still stained with dirt and blood. And in the corner of the room, a series of makeshift cages were stacked on top of each other, their bars bent and twisted. It was clear now, the dogs weren't just abandoned. They had been kept here. Trapped. Used. Max began to bark furiously, his growls growing louder and more insistent. Luna, trembling, backed away from the scene, her eyes filled with fear. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he knelt beside one of the cages. It was old, rusted, and the floor was littered with remnants of food and other signs of neglect. He could almost hear the faint echo of desperate whines, as if the ghosts of those who had been locked away here were still present. Suddenly, Ethan heard footsteps behind him. "Get away from there." Liam's voice broke through the silence, filled with panic. He grabbed Ethan by the shoulder, pulling him away from the cages. "What are you doing out here? I told you to stay back." But Ethan, his heart racing, pointed at the cages. "Dad, look. This is where they were kept. Max and Luna, this is what they've been through." Liam froze as he took in the sight. His face turned pale as he began to piece together the horrifying truth. This is what he's been doing. Hayes. He's running some kind of underground dog fighting ring. Ethan's mind was spinning. But why did he want them back so badly? He wanted them for that, for fighting. Liam nodded grimly. "Yes, that's what it looks like. And now we're in his sights. We need to get out of here. Fast." The drive home was silent. Ethan sat in the back seat with Max and Luna, his mind reeling from what he had just seen. The cabin, the cages, the collars. It was all a nightmare come true. Liam's voice broke through his thoughts. "We need to get to the police. This goes beyond just animal cruelty. Hayes is involved in something much bigger." But Ethan's heart sank as he looked at Max, who was resting quietly beside him. It was clear now, the battle wasn't just about saving the dogs anymore. It was about stopping someone who would stop at nothing to keep his dark secret hidden. And they were going to need all the help they could get. The days following their discovery of the cabin felt like a blur. The Wells family knew they couldn't stay in Ridgewood any longer. Victor Hayes wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was a man willing to use any means necessary to get what he wanted, and the Wells family now had something he needed. Max and Luna weren't just dogs to him. They were assets, valuable tools in his illegal dogfighting ring. The night after their return from the cabin, Liam stayed up late, going over all the evidence they had found. Photos of Hayes, the dog collars, the makeshift cages. He had made a few phone calls, but the police were cautious, unsure how far they could go without concrete proof of the crimes Hayes was involved in. Liam sat at the kitchen table, his eyes scanning the documents in front of him, his mind racing. "We need to get these dogs out of here," he muttered under his breath. "We need to get them somewhere safe, where Hayes can't touch them." Ava entered the room, her face drawn with worry. "Liam, what are we going to do? Hayes won't stop. I can feel it. We're sitting ducks here." Liam looked up at her, his face grim. "I know. But we can't go public with this yet. If we do, he'll just bury the evidence. We need to get Max and Luna to someone who can help, someone outside of Ridgewood. The decision was made. They would leave in the middle of the night. The house had become too dangerous. They would take Max, Luna, and their young son Ethan, and drive to a safe location, a remote cabin in the nearby mountains, far from Hayes's reach. As they packed the car, Ethan sat in the back with Max and Luna, the dogs resting beside him. His small fingers stroked the shepherd's fur, and he whispered softly to them. "We're going to be okay," he said quietly, his voice filled with more hope than fear. But as the family pulled out of the driveway, they didn't notice the dark SUV parked at the end of the street, its headlights dimmed, watching them closely. Hours later, the Wells family had driven through winding mountain roads, trying to stay calm. Ethan had fallen asleep, his head resting against the window. The storm had passed, but the tension still lingered in the air. "Do you think we're safe?" Ava asked, her voice low, as they rounded a curve in the road. "For now," Liam replied, his knuckles gripping the steering wheel tightly. "But we need to be careful. Hayes knows we have the dogs now. He won't give up until he gets them back." They didn't notice the headlights flashing behind them until it was too late. A black SUV pulled up fast, tailing them through the mountain roads. Liam's heart skipped a beat as he realized who it was. "It's him," Liam said, his voice tight with fear. "Hayes and his men. He's found us." Ava gasped. "What do we do? We can't outrun them on these roads." Liam's mind raced. "We need to get off the road. There's a turn up ahead that leads to an old logging trail. It'll be rough, but it'll give us a chance to lose them." He slammed his foot on the accelerator, swerving the car sharply onto the narrow dirt trail. The SUV behind them followed, its engine growling as it pursued them. The trail was rough, the tires skidding over the loose gravel as Liam navigated the winding path. The car bounced with every turn, but he kept his eyes focused ahead, determined to stay one step ahead of Hayes. Ethan woke up, startled by the rough ride. "What's happening? Why are we going so fast?" Liam didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the road, his grip on the wheel unrelenting. "We have to outrun them, son. Stay calm, okay?" Max and Luna sat up, their bodies tense. Max's ears were perked, and Luna was whimpering softly, sensing the danger that was closing in on them. Ava turned to Liam, her face pale. "They're still behind us, aren't they?" Liam glanced in the rearview mirror. The black SUV was gaining on them, its headlights piercing the darkness. "We need to get to the cabin," he said, his voice strained. As they rounded another bend, they saw the old cabin in the distance, its silhouette barely visible against the mountain backdrop. They were almost there, but the SUV wasn't far behind. "Get ready," Liam warned, as he slammed the car into park and jumped out, grabbing Max and Luna from the back seat. "Ava, stay inside. Ethan, stay with your mom." Ava nodded, her hands shaking as she held onto Ethan. "Be careful, Liam." Liam and the dogs ran toward the cabin, their feet pounding against the dirt path. They reached the front door just as the SUV screeched to a halt. Hayes's men spilled out, weapons drawn, their eyes locked on the Wells family. "Get inside." Liam shouted to Ava as he stood between them and the approaching men. Max let out a low growl, stepping forward protectively, his body tense and ready. Luna, though still weak from her pregnancy, stood beside him, her ears flat against her head. "Stay back," Liam warned, his voice fierce. "If you think you can take them from us, you're going to regret it." Victor Hayes stepped out of the SUV, his expression cold and calculating. "You think you can hide from me, Liam? You think this is over? Those dogs belong to me, and I'm not leaving here without them." Liam's fists clenched, his heart pounding in his chest. "They're not yours. They've never been yours. You're nothing but a monster." The standoff was tense. Max and Luna stood protectively in front of the Wells family, their eyes trained on Hayes and his men. The air was thick with danger. Hayes sneered. "You're out of your depth. You should have handed them over when you had the chance." Liam took a step forward, his body brimming with determination. "You're wrong. We're not afraid of you. And we're not giving up these dogs." Suddenly, Max lunged forward, barking fiercely as he charged toward Hayes's men. The dog's protective instincts took over, and in the ensuing chaos, Liam and Ava took the opportunity to retreat inside the cabin with Ethan. A confrontation erupted outside. Max and Luna were a blur of motion, dodging and weaving through the men, while Liam fought back with everything he had. The struggle was intense, but Max's strength and loyalty were unwavering. In the end, the sound of sirens filled the air. The police, having been alerted by the Wells family's earlier call, arrived just in time to arrest Hayes and his men. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. As the police took Hayes into custody, Liam, Ava, and Ethan stood outside the cabin, breathing heavily from the tension. The storm had passed, but the relief was slow to settle in. The fight wasn't over. They still had a long road ahead, but for the moment, they had won. Ethan looked up at his parents, his eyes filled with a quiet strength. "We did it, didn't we?" Liam nodded, his arm around his son. "Yes, buddy. We did." Max and Luna, now safe, sat by their side, the bond between the dogs and the Wells family stronger than ever. The battle with Victor Hayes was over, but their journey with Max and Luna was just beginning. The sun had barely risen the following morning, casting a soft golden light over the mountain landscape. The Wells family stood outside the cabin, their eyes still adjusting to the quiet after the chaos of the night. The air, now clear and fresh, felt like a new beginning. The storm had passed, both literally and metaphorically. Ethan stood next to Max, his small hand gently resting on the dog's back. He could feel the bond between them growing stronger with every moment. Max, though still recovering from the trauma of his past, leaned into Ethan's touch, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. Luna, the pregnant shepherd, sat nearby, her belly now gently swelling as she rested in the sun. The vet had confirmed she was doing better, and though her recovery would take time, she was safe. For the first time in what felt like forever, she relaxed, her body no longer tense with fear. Ava stood next to Liam, her hand resting on his arm as they watched their son and the dogs. The events of the past few days had been overwhelming, but the relief they felt now was palpable. They had survived, and not only that, they had protected the animals who had become so important to them. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. "We did it," Liam said quietly, his voice filled with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Ava nodded, squeezing his arm. "We did. And we've given these dogs a chance at a better life." Just then, a police car pulled up to the cabin, its siren cutting through the stillness of the morning. A pair of officers got out, and Liam tensed for a moment, unsure what to expect. But as they approached, the officer's expression softened. "Mr. Wells, Mrs. Wells," one of the officers said, shaking Liam's hand. "We've got Victor Hayes in custody, and the charges are being filed. It's going to be a long legal battle, but it looks like justice will finally be served." Liam let out a slow breath, the weight of the past few days beginning to lift. "Thank you. It's been a long road." The second officer nodded. "We'll be in touch if we need anything further from you. But for now, take care of yourselves, and those dogs. They've been through a lot." As the police left, Liam turned back to his family. "It's over. Hayes is going to face the consequences of his actions. But I think we all know there's more to this than just legal battles." Ava raised an eyebrow, her gaze shifting between him and their son. "What do you mean?" Liam smiled, the weight of the past days lifting from his shoulders. "I mean that these two," he nodded to Max and Luna, who were now resting peacefully together. "They've become part of this family. They're not just victims anymore. They're our family." Ethan's eyes shone with happiness as he looked at Max and Luna. "They're staying with us, right, Dad?" Liam crouched down beside him, ruffling his son's hair. "Of course. They're home now." Over the next few weeks, the Wells family settled into a new routine. They remained in the mountain cabin for a while, giving Max and Luna the time and space they needed to recover from the horrors of their past. Max, though still scarred by the memories of the dogfighting ring, had a new purpose, protecting the family he now called his own. Luna, who had given birth to a healthy litter of puppies, found peace in the warm embrace of her new family. Ethan spent his days playing with the dogs, teaching them tricks and spending as much time as he could with them. He had grown close to both animals, but Max had become his constant companion. Wherever Ethan went, Max was never far behind. They were inseparable, the bond between them stronger than anything the world could throw at them. Ava and Liam continued to deal with the aftermath of the legal battle with Hayes, but they were no longer afraid. With the dogs by their side, they knew they could face anything. And when the day came that the police finally managed to bring down Hayes's entire operation, they felt a deep sense of relief. Hayes's empire of cruelty was destroyed, and the surviving dogs were finally freed. One morning, as Ethan sat on the porch with Max, watching the sun rise over the mountains, he thought back to the night the storm had first brought him to the jungle. He thought about how scared he had been, how uncertain the future had seemed. But now, surrounded by the warmth of his family and the love of his dogs, he felt a sense of peace that he had never known before. "I'm glad we found you," Ethan whispered to Max, his hand resting gently on the dog's back. Max turned to look at him, his brown eyes filled with loyalty and understanding. In that moment, they both knew the truth: they were home. A few months later, the Wells family's lives had returned to normal, but something had changed. They had gone through unimaginable trials together, and they had emerged stronger for it. The love between them, and between them and Max and Luna, was unbreakable. One afternoon, as they sat around the kitchen table, the doorbell rang. Ethan ran to answer it, excitement in his eyes. When he opened the door, a familiar face was standing there, Detective Ramirez, the officer who had helped them throughout their ordeal. "Hey Ethan," Ramirez said with a smile. "I just wanted to check in on you guys. How's everything going?" "Good," Ethan replied, his face lighting up. "Max and Luna are doing great. They've been so happy here." Ramirez smiled, bending down to give Max a scratch behind the ears. "I'm glad to hear it. And I just wanted to say, you guys did something amazing. You stood up to Hayes when most people would have backed down. You helped those dogs when no one else would. That takes a lot of courage." Ethan beamed, his chest swelling with pride. "I just wanted to make sure they were okay." Detective Ramirez chuckled. "Well, you did more than that. You gave them a new life. And that's something not everyone gets to say." As the detective left, Liam and Ava exchanged a look of quiet contentment. They had fought for what was right, and they had won. But more importantly, they had found something even more precious: a family, united by love and a shared sense of purpose. And for Ethan, Max, and Luna, their journey together was just beginning. The story highlights the unbreakable bond between a young boy and two German shepherds who were rescued from a cruel past. It explores themes of resilience, bravery, and the power of standing up for what's right, even in the face of great danger. The Wells family's fight to protect the animals they love demonstrates that compassion and courage can overcome even the darkest of circumstances. This story serves as a reminder of the importance of kindness and empathy toward all living beings. It speaks to the power of love and the impact we can have when we stand up against cruelty. The Wells family's actions are an example of how one person, or in this case, a family, can make a profound difference in the lives of those in need, human or animal. If you enjoyed this story and felt moved by the powerful bond between Ethan and the dogs, we invite you to interact with this video. Please like, comment, and share your thoughts and emotions with us. Your feedback is a huge source of motivation for us to continue creating more meaningful stories like this one. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any future heartfelt stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Once again, a heartfelt thank you for watching. We appreciate your time and your support. Stay tuned for more inspiring stories, and have a wonderful day.